In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphims, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. The sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. And one of the seraphims flew to him with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me.
Many people have heard this story before. It's pretty well known. Comes up in ordination services, revival services, denominational meetings, youth gatherings, installations. I've even seen it used as a wedding text. This is a story that is read frequently. Several chapters into his book of prophecy, Isaiah feels led to share the story of his call to speak to the people. He has this vision of the throne of God with terrifying angels flying around singing about how great God is. This is not some random location. This is a vision of the Holy of Holies, the special room in the temple where God's presence is said to live. Now, nobody is allowed in the Holy of Holies except the high priest. And the high priest is only allowed to go into the Holy of Holies one time a year to make a very special sacrifice for the people. And it's believed by the people that if he goes in there even the tiniest bit ceremonially unclean, he will be immediately struck down and die. In fact, there are paintings that show the high priest getting ready to go in to the Holy of Holies to make the sacrifice with a rope tied around his waist, because the people felt if he went in there and died, well, we can't go in after him, but we can't leave him in there, so we best have a way to pull him on out. This is a terrifying place to be if you are not the high priest on the Day of Atonement, and here is Isaiah. He sees he's in God's presence and he's terrified, because he's heard the stories about what might happen if an unclean person stands in the direct presence of God. He looks around and basically says, well, I'm dead. Woe is me! I cannot be helped, for I am a man of unclean lips, from a people of unclean lips. I am in trouble. There is no way I am surviving this encounter. And as he is speaking, one of those very scary angels presses a coal to his lips and says, There, fixed it. And then God speaks. As it turns out, if you've been invited into the presence of God, you actually get to survive the encounter. And not only survive the encounter, but you get to hear God speak. And God says, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? To which Isaiah gives this now famous response, Here am I, send me. Now at this point in the sermon, the standard practice is to close the Bible really quick and talk about how great it was that Isaiah answered God's call, maybe mention how the thing with the coal shows how God can use anyone that God chooses, and then ask the gathered people how many of them have been called by God to do great things. And in the midst of the euphoria, in the midst of the description of this wonderful experience that Isaiah had, people raise their hands, they commit themselves, they are ready to be called by God. And that's all well and good. I'm pretty sure I've said most of those things to you at one point or another in the last few months. And I probably will say them again to you in the very near future. There's nothing wrong with any of those ideas, but how about this time we read the rest of God and Isaiah's conversation?
He said, "Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the hearts of this people calloused, make their ears dull, and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." Then I said, "For how long, Lord?" And he answered, "Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted, and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away, and the land is utterly forsaken. And though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as the terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land."
This is not a very happy representation of what's in store for Isaiah. He's ready to go out. He's on fire for God. He's going to share the message that he's been given, and nobody's going to listen. Isaiah seems to be looking for some kind of bright side to this statement from God, because he comes back with a question. Okay, people won't listen, but for how long? Like, we talking a couple weeks, a year? How long is it going to take for people to get the message? 18 months tops, right? No, God says, this will be the situation for the rest of your life. In fact, you can count yourself lucky if even a tenth of the people that you share God's message with bother to listen to it and have their lives changed. Suddenly, the enthusiasm that we felt at the first portion of this passage is hard to muster, shall we say. It was great when there were angels and coals and calls and singing and all these wonderful things, and this feeling that God had a special plan for us. It made us want to get up and go to work and do things for God. But now that we've heard how hard it's going to be, well, maybe that special plan that God had is less for me and more for the person next to me. You know, sometimes a teacher points and you think it's at you, but it's really, it was that guy the whole time, not me. And yet, the call of God remains. It stayed on Isaiah after he got the rest of the story. There was no one standing there that said, "Oh, sorry, Isaiah, this was actually for this guy over here." Isaiah went and did the work. And that call stays on you, on me, on each of us. There are times in our lives when we look out at the world around us and we think, when will people finally realize that we need to work for justice? When will people finally realize it's better to live in community with one another? When are people going to put it into their heads that we cannot build our community on the back of hatred and division? We cannot separate ourselves from others and declare that we alone have been chosen, that we must work together, that we must love each other, that we must live in community with each other, whether we disagree or not, whether we look alike or not, whether we voted alike or not. We must live in this community, because the only way we're going to get through this is together. And we look out and we see the division, and we see the separation, and we see people fighting and at odds with one another, and we, like Isaiah, say, "How long, O Lord, when will it end?" And yet, the call remains. It's going to be hard. Sometimes, quite often really, we will feel as though we have failed far more frequently than we've succeeded. We will feel that our failures were colossal and our successes were minimal. We will feel we have fallen short far more often than we ever measured up. But through it all, through every false start, every misstep, every failure, the call will remain. Because this calling is not about those failures. Our impact will not be measured by the many who do not listen. No, it will be seen in the lives which are changed, in the ears that do listen, in the one time in 10 that something great happens. And in those moments, we will know that all the failure in the world is absolutely worth it if just one life can be changed for the better through our sharing of God's love. Isaiah heard this warning about how difficult his call would be. He did his mental calculations, and then he went out and he served anyway. And from where I'm sitting, that is a much more inspirational story than the person who thinks they've received a call but has not yet weighed the cost. Isaiah knew what he was getting into, and he went and he did it anyway. Today, in this temple, God is calling you. And chances are that your call will be no easier than his. But I pray that when you hear God's calling in your life, you will, just like Isaiah, be able to respond. Here